Hi there. Apologies for missing the beginning of the session. I was starting a film on NASA's New Horizons mission to Pluto, where I'm glad to say there is climate change caused by methane and the 248-year orbit around the sun. We can put that into skeptical science at some point, I hope. How many of you have seen or know about Earth the Operator's Manual? Because I'll calibrate my comments. Okay, about a quarter. So I'll try and hit two different audiences with that. I'm glad to say I have a consensus statement with John Cook to say, yes, social scientists are good. And another consensus statement is I have doubts about Dan Kahan, as you'll see. He's not in the audience, I trust. No Dan Kahan. One of the things we learned is that you have to introduce who's speaking to the audience, and so I have to introduce myself. My background goes back in science television as far as the Cosmos series, the original one with Carl Sagan back in 1980. Which is why my hair is white, and we've done some novas with Lily Tomlin, which were intentionally funny. Some other novas are not intentionally funny. And I also worked with Al Gore on what was going to be a TV series with Lorne Michaels and Seth Meyer and so forth, but it became Earth in the Balance because, unfortunately, Al Gore became vice president and wasn't able to do a TV series, because he would have been excellent, as you'll hear in a minute. This is what TV programs are all about. Some of you may have seen this before. You may note that climate change is not very high on this list, but sharks are a recurring theme. And some cosmologists believe there's turtles all the way down, but in reality it's sharks all the way down on most television programs. So that provides a challenge. Another challenge which surprised me, because Gore is a wonderful communicator, a very warm human being, not pompous nor orange in face as he seemed to be in the campaign. But the blowback after an inconvenient truth based on the politics, ignoring the science, which was basically absolutely consensus science and had very few errors that even folks that come to AGU fall meetings could quibble with, was amazing to me, but that's a data point. And here's where we talk about Dan Kahan and motivated reasoning. As John said, there is the statement that people never change their minds because they are being pushed by their social circumstances, by their political ideologies, and their wish to identify with the group with which they belong. And that certainly may be the case. But Maybach and Lazarowitz, or Leisowitz I should say, find that in fact those people that are most strongly committed, pro and con, are the ones that are in fact motivated by motivated reasoning, and that those folks that are not strongly one way or the other are the ones that are amenable to change. And if Dan was correct, if you look at the 2010 figures, which is when we were preparing the proposal for Earth the Operator's Manual, you can see that actually 65% of the folks are not strongly against or dismissive. So you've got the movable middle, you've got a large number, and as far as I know, this is a democracy, so 50% plus one should be carrying the day. Tony made the point at a session in New York with Norman Lear and some other folks that were trying to say we need to use hot humor to attack climate change because serious documentaries have not made any difference. He said, you know, the consensus is that there is pro and con and there's sort of a balance, and he said that's not the case. Look at the results of the Six Americas study, and you find that, in fact, there is a consensus that climate change is a real problem and that something should be done about it. Something should be done about it. I'd like to be the only person here to use Karl Marx to say that philosophers have really interpreted the world, but the point, however, is to change it. And this is a statement as American as apple pie, because essentially Thomas Jefferson was saying exactly the same thing. As new discoveries are made, you in fact should change institutions. And as opposed to motivated reasoning being an explanation for why nothing ever changes, I'd like to say that seatbelts, helmets, smoking, recycling, and marriage equality have all changed in major ways in the past 30 years. And while it may take substantial amounts of time to change, change does happen, and that motivated reasoning does not motivate people all the time. So having said that, we use social scientists, and for some reason the text doesn't come up. This is Susie Moser, who was one of the advisors to our project. Earth the Operator's Manual was sponsored by NSF, thank you very much, appeared on PBS, and Susie was one of our advisors. She made us aware of something which is a rather interesting study called Fear Won't Do It, which sort of goes back to some of the things that John talked about. So this is some of the social science that went into our proposal. They actually looked at what pictures, what graphics, since I'm in television, graphics are important, motivate people to be concerned about climate change. And you can see the list of things on the left. These are things that motivate people to be concerned about climate change. Unfortunately, you'll see that those on the right are exactly the same things that motivate people to feel despondent about doing anything with climate change. They also studied what motivated people to think that there was the possibility of changing things. And you can see that while polar bears were not exactly a positive thing, the things that all of us can do in our regular lives, thermostats, cycling, fitting low-energy light bulbs in, were positive, motivational things. So this is social science that informed our idea to do a series with Richard Alley, who's a well-known climate scientist, who talked about an operator's manual for planet Earth, that you Earth scientists know enough about the workings of the planet that it's as if we have an operator's manual as we have for cars, for refrigerators, and so forth. That may be a little bit hubristic, but it was enough of an interesting catchphrase to make us want to do a TV series with him. And we said from the beginning that the TV series would be solutions-oriented, would try and not just be fact, 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 but also appeal to the emotions as well. We would try and be apolitical, and we would try and be authoritative. And Richard has unique abilities to do that. Normally in presentations I show the opening of the first program, but if I have enough time I'll show the ending of the third program. But we introduced Richard by saying he cycles, and in Portland, Oregon it was important in this science pub to show him cycling, that he plays soccer on Saturdays, goes to church on Sundays, he's a parent and he's a professor and he cares about jobs for his students and the future, and that he's a Republican. He's a card-carrying Republican, and that he's worked for an oil company, but he's also contributed to the IPCC and is proud of his contributions to the IPCC. That was the introduction in the first program, and we were glad that Skip Lupia, in a proceedings at the National Academy, said that it is important for communicators to establish their credibility before they start saying what they're saying. So the importance of the message and the importance of the messenger is something that Skip was pointed out, and that's something that we tried to do in the program. We also tried to have a diversity of messengers, a diversity of people talking about the importance of addressing climate change, ranging from a Texas rancher who actually was skeptical about climate change but had no doubts whatsoever about the checks that arrived in his mailbox as a result of having wind turbines on his land. We had Lisa Murkowski in Alaska saying it's nuts not to take advantage of the renewable resources that are around us. We had a Marine Corps general whose troops were going to be using solar panels in the field to cut back on batteries. So we tried to have a diversity of messengers that would take the message to the people. 3 hours of public television, the last program of which was full of case studies of 5 American communities that were moving forward, from Portland to Fort Worth, where the mayor is an avid cyclist as well. All of these are online, freely available. You can link to them. They're all on YouTube. You can embed in your own sites, and I'll get into the Facebook page later. We certainly did address the consensus science. Richard is an ice core scientist, so we talked about the way in which ice cores show definitively that while there's natural variability, we're outside the bounds of the natural variability. It was 180, 280, 280, 180, 280, 180. But when you're at 390, as it was when we did the series, 400 now, that's outside the bounds of natural variability. But Earth science also shows that there are abundant natural resources that are available as well, and we tried to play that up. Rather than going back to the 19th century scientists who made the breakthroughs, we talked about the way in which the US Air Force had to figure out the radiative properties of CO2 in order to get their heat-seeking missiles to work. So global warming and the effects of CO2 was not a commie, liberal, Karl Marx, lefty, hippie, Birkenstock phenomenon, but was in fact endorsed by the most militaristic, jingoistic, chauvinistic, torture-inducing aspects of American society, but don't quote me on that. We had the Quadrennial Defense Review cited, and once again the Quadrennial Defense Review has been reinforced by the 2014 Quadrennial Defense Review. If you look at Hampton Roads, Virginia, the US Navy is moving their wharves up by 6 feet, not by the 3 feet that the IPCC says is the 2100 limit. So the US military is taking this seriously, is deploying its assets in the Arctic, taking account of climate change, and if they're taking account of it, we all should do so. Unfortunately, David Titley is a PhD meteorologist, but we were able to catch him in his dress whites, so he had more credibility. Another issue is that if you go to different locations, you want to customize your message to those locations. So on 12/7/2010, a day that will not live in infamy, we went to the Midway in San Diego and had the military talking about going green, again trying to reinforce that. So Richard has a little saying, voices do matter. Some people who would not listen to Richard will listen to Rear Admiral Titley. And we also had, being NSF sponsored, we had a major evaluation component to our project. And so we tested this military-oriented message, which was only part of our programs, obviously. In Fort Worth, the audience came back and said, yes, this is a great way of getting around people's defenses, getting around some aspects of motivated reasoning. In New York, they said the opposite. They said, that's not a good idea, but we, being TV people, wanted to do the military aspect, and so we did anyway. But we did listen to the social scientists that were there. Amazingly enough, there's actually some experiential physiological proof that some of our strategies worked. This was a skin thermal test that was done by somebody completely unrelated to us in North Carolina, looking at effective arousal while watching one of the TV programs. This showed that there was a downturn during the military segment, but we're glad to say that there was the greatest arousal, the greatest affective response with the positive solutions. This is work that Karen McNeil had done, which we thought was particularly interesting. In a novel twist, we took Richard to do science pubs and other kinds of events around the country, which became kind of focus groups for making things work. I'm going to skip through things very quickly here and say that rather than statistics, this is the Stern report, you need to have stories. And we had a story which the transition from throwing human waste out of the window into the clean energy economy was also 1% of the global GDP. I don't know who said this, but we think it's pretty important to say that you can't just do websites, you've got to do social media as well. And we found that on social media, the things that got liked and shared the most were positive stories. So Modi and Gujarat having solar covers on canals was one of the most widely shared of our resources. I'm going to skip through this because this is me talking about it's nice that Lady Gaga has lots of likes, but the engagement index was lower. And to say that science advances one funeral at a time. So education is absolutely crucial. We have materials on our website for that. Mark McCaffrey likes our project. We like that. Richard did a MOOC. It's very good. And we're doing something that I do want to leave some flyers for those of you who are faculty members. Richard's book is a really good primer. Ed Maybach says that. We got a quote from him as well. And based on the University of Wisconsin's Big Read project, we're asking campuses to be interested in adopting this book for first-year reading, campus-wide reading activities, so that when kids come back or come to campus for the first time, there's a group discussion about both climate science and the positive energy solutions. This worked in Weber State, which is a rather conservative campus in Utah, and this is the resources that we're making available thanks to a follow-on grant from NSF. I had a clip that was really nice from Richard interacting with kids online, where you could see the kids actually nodding as he was going through things. This is the National Energy Summit in Washington, where we invite you to come along to a workshop all about this Read for the Earth project, which you can pick up flyers on. This is the end of the first program, which I don't have time for, so I will go to the lessons. Find and share the big ideas of the science. That's what John is saying, and I totally agree with Frank Luntz. Say it one time, say it again, and keep on saying it. Know your various audiences and have different messages for the different audiences. Showcase messengers who connect. Make sure you've established the credibility with those different audiences. Adapt your messages to local circumstances. Think about positive solutions. Have stories as well as statistics. Enlist social science, or at least some social sciences if they don't come from Yale. Listen to your evaluators and adapt as you go. It's not over when it's over. And since this is San Francisco, keep on trucking. Thanks very much. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer emails. I'm sorry that I've run out of time here. Well, there's one question.
One question. One quick question.
That makes it a perfect presentation.
You did a great job.
Absolutely no questions. Thanks very much, everybody.